Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming out this morning. I'm guessing a few more people will be trickling in, especially as we get closer to lunchtime, because there is free food here. And I've been told that students in particular are attracted to events that involve free food, right? My name is Tom Gelton. For many years, I was a correspondent for NPR. I retired from the network. I covered religion there, as Michelle also does. I retired from the network in 2021, but I'm now proud to be attached to Georgetown University and the Berkeley Center as the first Sacca Family Religion and International Journalism Fellow. As Michael Kessler, the executive director of the Berkeley Center, has said, Georgetown is truly grateful for Kareem and Danya Sacca's generosity and their keen foresight that our public discourse is served by sharper reporting about religion and politics globally. And as the first beneficiary of this fellowship, I echo those sentiments. In 1883, a young Jewish woman named Emma Lazarus was asked to write a poem as part of an effort to raise funds for the erection of the pedestal for the Statue of Liberty. At the time, she was active in a movement to resettle refugees who were fleeing anti-Jewish pogroms in Tsarist Russia. The poem that she wrote for that fundraising effort included these lines, which I'm sure you'll recognize. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Those lines reflected her notion of what America's message to the world should be. The poem was not attached to the Statue of Liberty until 1903, but those words did in fact become symbolic of America's identity as a country that welcomed refugees. It was not a promise that was always kept, but it was always there. During the Cold War, the United States took a lead in taking people who were fleeing from communist repression. In 1961, President Kennedy established the Agency for International Development, in large part with the idea of countering Soviet influence in what was then called the developing world. In the 60-plus years since then, the United States has been a key player, both in its embrace of refugees, in offering asylum, and in providing humanitarian assistance in those places of the world from which people were trying to escape. All those efforts, from refugee aid to humanitarian assistance, are now facing an existential crisis. Under the Trump administration, aid efforts are being portrayed as charity, and they are facing dramatic cutbacks. Elon Musk famously said he thinks the USAID program should be fed into the wood chipper. The entire asylum process is on hold. Refugee resettlement has been halted. Now, to be sure, these cutbacks are tentative. Some of the programs that have been suspended could be reinstated after a review to be sure they align with U.S. foreign policy interests. But there's no question refugee assistance, asylum policies, and humanitarian aid are facing the most severe challenge they've ever faced. And that's what we're going to be discussing today, what's happening and what's at stake. We have an extraordinary panel, 5 people with deep experience and knowledge about these programs. From the Washington Post, we are fortunate to have Michelle Burstein with almost 20 years of experience as a religion reporter. Prior to the Post, she spent a decade with the Associated Press. She has won numerous awards for her religion reporting. 3 times, the Religion Newswriters Association awarded her top honors for overall excellence in religion reporting. And in these past few months, she has written regularly about the faith groups whose aid efforts have been called into question. Next to Michelle is Bill Canny. He is the Executive Director of Migration and Refugee Services at the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. Bill has more than 40 years of experience working in relief and development operations, much of it with Catholic Relief Services, one of the preeminent agencies serving refugees. Prior to his current post, he directed operations for the Papal Foundation, which assists the Vatican in poverty alleviation initiatives around the world. From the evangelical world, we have Chelsea Sobolek, currently the Director of Government Relations at World Relief, which is the largest evangelical refugee resettlement agency in the United States and a leading provider of humanitarian aid. Prior to that, she was at Lifeline Children's Services, the leading evangelical adoption agency in the United States. Mark Tooley is president of the Institute on Religion and Democracy, which, true to its name, advocates for democracy, human rights, and religious freedom around the world. For 6 years, he worked at the CIA, so he has keen insights into the strategic challenges facing the United States. He's also a lay leader in the Methodist Church. Finally, Alan Cross, pastor of Petaluma Valley Baptist Church in California. I met Alan when he had been pastoring in Montgomery, Alabama, where he was a leader in racial reconciliation efforts, often bringing white and African American pastors together. One of his missions in Montgomery was to highlight the civil rights struggles that took place in Montgomery, including the infamous attack on the Freedom Riders there in 1961. And he took me on a tour of that site when I was working at NPR on a piece about the roots of racism within the Christian church. He is now turning his attention to the plight of immigrants and refugees, focusing on how evangelicals are responding. Thanks to all of you for giving us your valuable time to this discussion. I'm going to begin asking each of them kind of a leading question, and then they're going to have a few minutes to respond, and then after that, it's going to become a much more freewheeling conversation, and at the end, we're going to have a question and answer session so you can become part of the discussion. Well, let me sit down here now so I don't have to stand for an hour and a half. And I'm hoping you can still hear me. Michelle, let's begin with you, and I'm just going to go down the line. Can you just give us, because you are the journalist here, give us a kind of a quick overview of what has happened in the last 3 months as far as all these programs are concerned?
Yes. So it's obviously very complicated, as everybody here is aware. And as Tom mentioned, some of this happened in the first Trump term. This is much more dramatic and more serious, but some of it, some of it is familiar. There was the pause to refugee aid in 2017, and then a sharp cap, and then a severe drop in how many people came into the country in Trump's first term. But anyway, so now I kind of think about it in terms of the current cuts. So on Inauguration Day, President Trump suspended refugee resettlement in the United States. So obviously many US-based groups have been dealing with that. They have commitments to refugees for the first 90 days that they're here. So there's people who were canceled, families whose trip was canceled, families that are here but without the support that they expected. And he also, on Inauguration Day, halted foreign aid. So that was USAID and help for refugees that are not coming into the United States, people who are migrating outside the US, and that's tens of billions of dollars. And different government agencies, as well as nonprofits, PRM and DHS and UNHCR. So then there's been litigation, and some of that is overlapping. There's a primary suit involving some of the groups that resettle refugees who are challenging the question of whether this money that's been congressionally approved can be halted. Right now, actually this week, there was some back and forth in court related to that case where a judge said, where basically the government was sort of delaying restarting the programs and raising questions like, are there DEI programs connected to any of the funders? So there's a lot of back and forth still in the courts about that. There's obviously, which Bill will talk about, the USCCB has been in court talking about, again, this issue of congressionally mandated funding and also significant back pay that the Bishops' Conference had been in contract with the government to get. I think there was a recent, I'm sure he can talk more about this, but there was a question about what court that was supposed to be in, whether it was a contract dispute or whether it was something related to the role of Congress. So where we are now is, I think, as Tom mentioned, it's not really clear if these are, I mean, as we all know, things are changing every day. So whether these, one thing I'll be curious if we talk about is whether there's a debate within the administration about whether these are permanent cuts or temporary cuts. Right, whether the resettlement programs that we have in this country will be cut. What about foreign aid? And also constituencies. There's, obviously the administration has different constituencies that have, whether that's Christian groups that want to bring people into the United States, et cetera. So I'd be curious what these folks can tell us from the inside. And so some of the kind of broad questions that I'm thinking about as a reporter is, again, what role sort of does the religious identity of our country play into this? How significant is that? Some people oppose programs because they're bringing in people of other faiths. And also this whole growing, I want to say trend, it's more serious than a trend, but sort of this attack on faith-based groups that work with the government. And now I look back and I see these little explosions about Catholic Charities in recent years, and I probably didn't fully understand or underestimate the way in which those partnerships for some people became such a big target, whether that's to do with misinformation or concern about shared values between faith-based groups and the government. But I think there's a broader question about what's the future of faith-based groups' view of partnering with the government. And then there's just the kind of, gut, on the ground level, to what degree Americans see this as a moral and religious issue, and what kind of conversations they're having at the ground level in churches and synagogues and mosques and that kind of thing. So that's a fast overview. To Bill.
So, Michelle, there was a meeting, I understand, at the State Department last week with representatives from faith groups. And I think it's important, as you suggest, to sort of separate rhetoric from reality. And there were some quotes coming out of that meeting suggesting that some people in the administration see aid efforts as philanthropy or charity. Right. How serious should we take those kind
comments?
of sentiment?
You mean philanthropy for the aid groups?
Yeah.
Right.
Are these efforts really seen purely as philanthropy that the U.S. government really doesn't have a stake in?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, obviously, how much education the average American has about these programs and what they do and soft power and all these things is sort of up in the air. Yeah, I think there's a strong, rhetoric around the idea that, I mean, foreign aid, so a lot of these things are modern issues, right? I mean, foreign aid itself was not really a thing until I think the 50s, I mean, in a, kind of formal big government type of way. So I think there's a lot of, education to be done about, what's really, how is this money being used? Is it in our interest? To what degree is it in our interest? And I think you have people like, the Secretary of State, who's been a strong advocate for the idea that this is very much in our self-interest. Obviously, it depends on the program, but you had attacks on democracy promoting government and agencies in the last couple months as well. So, yeah, I don't know. I think Americans have a lot of stuff to debate and educate ourselves about to have these conversations properly.
Well, it's kind of a teachable moment, I guess. So, Bill, let's talk just a bit about sort of the way that the refugee resettlement program has worked in recent years, kind of in general terms, not just with respect to what Catholics are doing, but with all sort of aid groups have been doing. How was it set up, and how was it organized, administered, et cetera?
Yeah, so this refugee resettlement program, the United States Refugee Admissions Program, has in its current iteration been going on since 1980. Mm-hmm. But even previous to that, there was a similar program, but codified in 1980. And what happens is, as we all know, people flee persecution, war, drought, et cetera, and they end up in various places around the world where they're protected by governments, oftentimes with the United Nations involved, other countries. And those folks, the first thing the community tries to do is get them back to their country, all right? They have a right to live at home. And that's a primary consideration of the Catholic Church. People have a right to stay where they are. For a group, for many people, and it's some 1.5 million now, the United Nations determines that they cannot go home, and they can't stay in the country where they are. So they designate them as refugees in need of resettlement. A few countries around the world have official resettlement programs, like the United States. It's the largest. And each year since 1980, on average, we invite 85,000 people, not 285,000, not 85,000 refugees to come to the United States. Our government goes overseas, adjudicates those refugees, examines their case, looks at their background, does an extensive security vetting, often taking 2 years, and invites them to the United States. When they get to the United States, 10 agencies, by the way, this is a lawful program, they're invited to eventually become citizens in our country, 85,000 a year. When they get to the United States, 10 agencies, including the United States Catholic Conference of Bishops with local charities, resettle them in an attempt to integrate them into our society, into our culture, into our towns. The initial resettlement program is for 90 days, right, where we help them pick them up at the airport, find housing, help them find jobs, get the kids in school, connect them to social services, and basically provide language, hook them up with their churches, whichever faith they wish to join. Every agency is non-denominational in that sense, and gets them started in our country, particularly with employment. There are a couple other programs that have been interrupted. This has been interrupted. Another one helps those who are more vulnerable for a longer period. And there's another program that intensifies the job search for people if they haven't found one in 90 days. So that's basically the program. The problem is that it was terminated by a stop work order and now terminated while we had 32,000 people in that 90-day program. So our agreement with the government and those people was to help them, the 10 agencies. We had some 6,700. So we found the stop of the program unjust. We had an obligation to these people to integrate them into our country, and due to that obligation, we felt compelled actually to take the U.S. government to court, in a sense on behalf of these people, in order that they can that we can finish the job that we were contracted to do.
And what's happening to them now? Those people that are caught in that
So it's been, it's hard to say what's happening in general. Some of the agencies had to stop work pretty quickly. We've tried to, in the Catholic Charities, to keep essential services going. There was an exception, if you will, to the total USAID stop work also, which we fell under, where life-saving or essential services could continue, and we're arguing that housing, food, kids going to school, health care are all essential services in this country. So it varies. I heard a report the other day where a chap, could no longer, the caseworker could no longer help, and he was on his way to homelessness. For our part, we're tracking our 6,700 and trying to get essential services to them without getting paid by the U.S. government.
Without getting paid?
Yes.
So that's obviously putting quite a strain on your own resources and capabilities.
So across the country, you've had a number of staff layoffs among the 10 agencies, including ours. People have tried to keep essential staff, if you will. Our layoff plan at the conference was related to the 90-day period. After 30 days, how many refugees would still need to be served? We would cut staff to that point, et cetera. So we've opted for a sort of layered layoff plan to try and, again, meet our obligations, frankly, to these refugees.
Chelsea, pick up Bill's story with the example of what's happening at World Relief. Now, you told me before we started that you had, up until this point, how many staff members working on these issues around
About
the world?
2,000 around the world.
How many?
About 2,000
About
around the world.
2,000, yeah.
Yes.
And what has your agency gone through in the past month or so?
Yeah, well, I have a lot to say, so I will try to be quick. Thank you all for being here. A couple disclaimers at the top. World Relief is a nonpartisan organization, and we genuinely mean that. We work with both sides of the aisle. We also don't endorse candidates. And at the top, I'll say we have affirmed the administration's prerogative. We would affirm any administration's prerogative to reassess foreign assistance to make sure taxpayer dollars are being used wisely. And we had prepared quite extensively because then President-elect Trump had told us he was going to suspend refugee resettlement. So we took him at his word. We had prepared for that. We had even prepared for a pause in foreign assistance. What has happened over the past 6 weeks has gone far beyond the pale of what I think any of us really, really prepared for. And I'll get into that. But World Relief is the humanitarian arm of the National Association of Evangelicals. And I want to talk about this before I directly answer Tom's question. But we are in the season of Lent right now, where we fast preparing for Easter. And that's actually how World Relief was started. We were started by a small church in Boston in 1944 who was responding to displaced people post-World War II. And they gave up a Lenten offering throughout the season of Lent, and that's eventually how World Relief came into existence. And for our 80-year history, we've partnered with local churches and communities, both here in the U.S. and around the world, and we've served in over 100 countries. But the recent policy changes have significantly impacted our ability to carry out our mission. I should also say, even though we are an evangelical organization, we will serve anyone without question. We serve anyone and everyone. Michelle talked about the stop work order at the end of January, which, as Bill said, immediately impacted resettlement agencies because we were then on the hook for millions of dollars, filling in the gap that Congress had authorized and appropriated. I used to work on the Hill, and I feel very passionate about Congress had authorized and appropriated these dollars. And the State Department, who invited these tens of thousands of refugees, had promised, and it's a tiny amount, it's approximately $1,300 per refugee per month. It is supposed to cover housing, food, transportation, all these essential services. And I don't know about you, I can't live off $1,300 a month. So organizations like ours were then immediately on the hook for that money. I am pleased to say that we have had private donors be incredibly generous. And throughout our whole history, we have worked in conjunction with churches and private donors. But that immediate stop work order did have devastating consequences for recently arrived refugees. What also happened at the end of February, we're in March now, all my days have gone together, is the State Department terminated all contractual agreements with resettlement agencies, with all 10 resettlement agencies, effectively ending a 45-year bipartisan partnership with the administration. Another development that impacts refugees and goes hand in hand is all of the stop work order terminations of life-saving humanitarian assistance abroad. And why that matters is what happens in Haiti, what happens in Sudan, pushes people, it moves. Conflict is one of the top 3 drivers of displacement in the world. And so when World Relief, who is one of the only INGOs in the Darfur region, cannot serve, people move or people try to move. Anyone who works in this, there's displaced people internally displaced people who don't cross a border but are maybe fleeing violence in one part of the country and leave to another part. But these life-saving foreign assistance programs help people hopefully be able to stay home or stay in their country or their region and not have to arrive at the southern border where they can't even claim asylum right now. So that's happened too, and they do go hand in hand, where what happens in other parts of the world does cause people to move. I do have some good news though. We did a recent research with Lifeway Research, which is the research arm of the Southern Baptists. And we found very strong evangelical support for refugees and immigrants. The data is clear that evangelicals deeply care about these issues. 7 in 10 evangelical Christians believe that the U.S. has a moral responsibility to receive and care for refugees. And about 2/3 of that 70% are people who voted for President Trump in November. And this is really important I'm a Christian for people of my faith, because in FY24, about 1/3 of the refugees who were resettled into the U.S. were persecuted Christians. So these are brothers and sisters in the faith. So while support might be high from our research, the reality is that doesn't always translate into action. Where people are moved and compelled to call their congressman to speak out about these things. So we continue. I do the government relations, so I'm on the Hill and with the administration all the time. We continue to advocate for a reopening of the resettlement program. The executive order that was signed on Inauguration Day, it was a 90-day pause, so there is a review process, and so we're absolutely advocating for resettlement to begin in some capacity. I should say, too, all of this impacts certainly kind of your general refugee. It also impacts Afghans who served alongside the U.S. military in Afghanistan to fight the Taliban and now are not able to access safety because of all the recent changes.
A lot of them are stuck in Qatar, right?
Yes,
A
pardon?
lot of them are stuck in Qatar right
Yes,
now.
a lot of them are stuck in third countries, Pakistan, Qatar, which Pakistan has begun deportations back. So it's very complicated, complex. I mean, you all know immigration was one of the top 3 issues that people voted on. One thing I will say till I'm blue in the face, for anyone who will listen, a lot of Americans have said, well, we want immigrants who have done it the right way, who are legal. And we have said refugees have waited, have been vetted, have done it the right way, and still this is the response. So we are advocating. World Relief also serves other sectors of immigrants as well, but this is, like I think Tom, you said earlier, foreign assistance is not charity. Refugee resettlement is not charity. It's the best of who we are as Americans, both resettling those who cannot safely go home and to provide assistance around the world. It's as an American, I think it's the best of who we are and who we should be and who we should strive to be. And I know I'm running out of time. I'll end on a personal note. I'm a mom of a little boy. And as we've walked through the past 6 weeks of just complete and utter chaos, I've thought so much about my son. And as a mom, I'm sure there's a lot of parents in here, we would do absolutely anything to protect our children and give our children safety and stability. And I think I just want to end, yes, there's a lot of policy changes, and yes, we work on these, but I want to end just reminding each one of us that these are fellow human beings, and it's a very human thing to do, to want to find safety and security for yourself and for your family. And so there's a lot that gets caught up in policy conversations, and they're very important, but just a reminder to, I think, all of us that these are also fellow human beings who deserve dignity and respect.
Thank you, Chelsea. Terrific. Mark, I was eager to have you on this panel because, as I said, the roots of the U.S. refugee program were in a geopolitical context. And they were justified with strategic reasoning. And we now know that this administration's main concern about these programs are whether they align with U.S. foreign policy interests. Could you talk to that question a little bit, how you see that concern, that critique? What is sort of the geopolitical context of this debate?
I was at a party last night talking to a German political expert aligned with the Christian Democrats based here in D.C., and he was telling me about the United States of America and its new reality. The new reality, as he saw it, was Fortress America, semi-withdrawn from the world, no longer a benign global leader, strictly transactional, strictly focused on the material interest of the United States. And I said, surely that's not permanent. He says, yes, there's no going back. And so I pushed back on that German vision of the United States. And I said, no, the United States, however unevenly from the very start, has always been idealistic. And most Americans from the very start have thought our nation had aspirations, global aspirations, rooted in democracy and freedom and decency for all people, and portraying our nation, however unevenly, as a beacon of freedom and a welcome outpost to those who are seeking freedom. So I'm sticking with that optimistic perspective on the United States of America, but we are going through an episode where there is a pulling back from our historic role as a beacon of democracy to the world, this more transactional perspective that seems to be hostile even to refugees who are fleeing despotism, who are fleeing religious persecution. It seems very odd that this administration, which would not exist but for the support of active Christians, both evangelicals and Roman Catholics, that religious liberty is almost falling off the map of concerns. Some rhetoric about religious liberty around the world, but nearly all of the agencies and programs that advocate on behalf of religious freedom, human rights, and democracy around the world are being eliminated or cut back very sharply. And there's almost this notion that democracy promotion or human rights promotion is somehow woke and therefore belongs to the left and doesn't fit into an America First approach. Well, I assume all of us up here on the panel would argue that even if you adopt the America First paradigm, if we are seeking American interest around the world, we do want to help those who support democracy and religious freedom and human rights, because almost inextricably they're going to be aligned with America's interests. They're going to find common interest with us against tyrannical regimes. And so it's not just a benevolence or a philanthropy to offer assistance to those who are fleeing tyranny, but rather it builds up, at the very least, our soft power around the world and enhances America's image around the world, but perhaps it even builds up our hard power, and it brings to our country exceptional people who have a great commitment to our principles and often bring with them tremendous skills, whether entrepreneurial or political or scientific, that enhance our hard power, just as many refugees from around the world really helped to make our victory in World War II possible. And the same was true in the Cold War, and for whatever conflicts that, God forbid, may come in the future, I suspect we'll only be able to win thanks to many refugees from around the world who share in our participation and our support for core American principles.
Now, Mark, one of the things we've heard from the Trump administration is that we are no longer in the Cold War period. We're now in a multipolar world. Our strategic interests are not the same as they were 50 years ago. But the argument that you just laid out has a lot in common with the traditional argument in favor of soft power and refugee assistance. How do you see the argument sort of refashioned in this kind of current moment?
Well, the argument that we're no longer in the Cold War or the post-Cold War world, but this new era of contending superpowers, but the struggles in many ways remain the same. We are contending against non-democratic regimes that oppose our core principles, and if we are looking for friends and allies around the world, we're looking to showcase the best of our principles Obviously, China is our main adversary, political and economic, and China is strong because it's economically strong and it has a lot of entrepreneurial and scientific initiative. And so if we are to prevail in this struggle with China, we're going to have to attract some of the best minds from around the world, either to come to America or to work with America to keep America and Western democracy strong. So yes, we are in a new era, but the struggles remain remarkably the same.
Okay, good. Alan, you're in a unique position among the five of us here, six of us, including me. Not only have you written about these issues, but you also have a local connection. You pastor a congregation. None of the rest of us have that kind of local focus. So how does it look from your perspective as a pastor of a church in Northern California?
Yeah, and I pastored before that in Alabama for many years. And so just kind of looking at West Coast and the South, I'm doing doctoral work on this now as well, like just researching how evangelicals receive immigrants and refugees and what are the factors that lead to a receiving perspective. And what I found is that it is really complicated. You'll see polls that say evangelicals say this or evangelicals believe this, and the truth is often in the middle because you can get polls to kind of say what you want them to say, or you can interpret them how you want to. I've been doing research with interviews and talking to people. There are these ministries that exist around the country that are co-located with refugee resettlement agencies that are locally supported, they're church-based, and they're the volunteers for welcoming in the refugees when they come. And so those churches train people, they mobilize teams. They're the ones who meet people at the airports often. There are other community volunteers who do as well, but often it's church people who do that. And so there's a perspective that they're working from biblically, that when people come to us, we should welcome them and receive them. And I don't see much pushback on that concept of local church ministry. When you live in Spokane, Washington, or where I live in Northern California, or Birmingham, Alabama, and a refugee comes to you, they're already here, how should the church treat them? Well, you should welcome them in. When that conversation then becomes extrapolated into geopolitical realities or the border or how many refugees should we receive, that's when a lot of evangelicals will then step back and say, well, we don't know, that's not our purview, or they consider other factors that are going on. And that's where the polling gets really wonky, because the questions are asked, should evangelicals receive refugees? And the answer is yes. But then if you ask the question, what should be the United States position on how many refugees that we receive, you'll get a different answer. And those things aren't contradictory because you're really asking two different questions. And that's where this gets really confusing for people. So on a local church level, there is broad consensus for we should minister to people, treat people well, no matter who they are, no matter where they're from. But then when you look at a bigger picture, it gets confusing. So what I have worked on and what I've encouraged is I'm not responsible for who comes here. I'm not responsible for the border. I'm not responsible for a U.S. refugee or immigration policy. But we are responsible on a local level for how we treat people that move into our community. And that's where refugee resettlement has worked really well because it is legal. You do have sponsors. You have people who help integrate people. And what I found is that what's really needed for conservative evangelicals to engage on this issue are really three spheres that are all working at the same time, which is order and security, confidence that what's happening is happening legally and happening well, and people are vetted, and it's all within orderly processes. The second is compassion. How do we treat people who are in need and when they come? And then the third really is integration. When people come here, are they integrating into the community? Are they being welcomed in? Are they getting jobs? Are they learning English? Are they incorporating in? And when one of those things falls out of the equation, there's a reaction against it. If there's not perceived to be order and security, like what's happened at the border the last several years, this reaction that we're having is actually pretty predictable. And I would submit to immigrant and refugee advocates that when you see asylum, what's happened with asylum abuse, what's happened at the border, you can kind of predict that a couple years later there's going to be a lot of reaction against that on some level, and so the fallout has been drastic. because people conflate refugees with asylum seekers, with the border. They conflate it all together. When there's a lack of compassion, eventually there'll be a response say, hey, wait a minute, we need to treat people well. And so without compassion, you have cruelty. Without order, you have chaos. And then if there's not integration, if the people coming into our communities are not really becoming a part of our communities because of isolation or because of siloing up into different groups, then people begin to say, wait a minute, we've welcomed these people in, but yet we don't really feel like we're neighbors with them. So how do you fix that? So I would say, looking at this in the future, the local church is really well positioned to be able to definitely lead out in compassion and definitely lead out in integration. It's the government's job to provide order and security. And I think what we're seeing right now is a response to what has been really chaotic the last several years on the border. And then the fallout has been legal. The best program we've had has been refugee resettlement, in my opinion, but that has been kind of on the chopping block, I guess, in response. And so when it comes to the local church, if you asked people directly and got away from the big picture polling and say, what do you think about if someone from another country comes to you in need, you're going to get those 90% answers. We should minister to them. We should welcome them. We should, be good neighbors. If you then shift it to, what do you think about, border policy, or what do you think about asylum seekers, then you're going to get different answers.
Can you revisit that dynamic of compassion, chaos, cruelty?
Yeah, so there's actually it's an academic theory that when there's a perception that things are in chaos, there's going to be a shift to the other side to say we need order so that we can operate well, so we can welcome well. The last several years, what's happened with millions of people coming created a definite perception that this is out of control. And so the response to that has been, let's step back, allow the government, now that Trump has been elected, to now put this back into order. And so you're having a pause on really reaction against it. This is different 2025 than what the response was in 2017. I mean, everybody is saying that. You're not having the real opposition to a lot of these policies because people are stepping back to kind of wait to see what will happen, and is this going to be set back into order? If it keeps going long term, and if there's perceived to be cruelty in the response to the chaos that was there before, then people will begin to say, wait a minute, hold on, these are real people, these are real needs. It might not translate very quickly into we need to bring more people in, but it will begin to surface in how we treat the people who are already here. And that's where I think you'll begin to see a desire for, they're already here, let's treat them well, which is why I think what Catholic Charities and World Relief and other groups are doing as they're pivoting to, really making sure that the people already here are taken care of, that's where people begin to recognize we need to help with that. They're already here. You have Afghan refugees who've already come. How do we support them? You have others who are already here. So that's where you're going to get more traction right now.
Chelsea or Bill, do you have any reaction to that? In terms of what you see, sort of, Alan laid out kind of what he sees as a process that is underway?
Well, I would say I think he's certainly right. The perception that there was chaos at the border and that it wasn't managed well, I would say it was more or less mismanaged, leading to a perception of chaos, has really raised the issue publicly, along with certainly the busings from Texas to some major cities. The busings which were not organized and were in fact, designed to instigate chaos. This is a problem that we have. The instigation of chaos, as opposed to compassion, is something that's difficult to understand. But I think he's right that these things have led to a general perception that the stranger, the foreigner, is causing problems for us in ways that are untrue in most instances, but are cutting the average American's sort of compassionate instincts as part of the founding of the ethos of our country and our many religious traditions. The way back, unfortunately, will probably be more pain inflicted on people who don't deserve it, pain inflicted on people with us already. And I think this will test us in the coming weeks and months as to sort of who we are as compassionate Christians or compassionate Muslims or compassionate people of the Jewish faith. It will test us, I think. And I don't look forward to it. I fear it, but I see it in the way this administration has approached not only refugees and migrants, but a broad part of our society and parts of our society that I think perhaps they see as resistant to the things that they want to promote.
And I'll just add very quickly, I think Alan's exactly right. Your, average Christian does care about those three issues that you laid out. I'll add, if I was advising this administration, I think I would say both to the administration and to the general public, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. I want to secure an orderly border. I think most of us want a secure and orderly border process, and I want there to be legal humanitarian pathways into the United States. At this point, we've essentially cut off asylum, refugee resettlement, a lot of the humanitarian parole, temporary protective status programs. So I would just say yes, and we can do both. It doesn't, I think, not to talk about the media, but I think in a lot of these broad narratives, it's really painted as an either we are safe and secure with the U.S.-Mexico border, or we are so generous to all these people. And it doesn't have to, it's never been an either or, and it doesn't have to be. And I think if I was speaking both to the general public and the administration and Congress, which is my job, and I do this, but I would say we can do both as a country, and I think both are important and go hand in hand. And I think the second thing I would say, just very quickly, is, like I said at the top, immigration is very, very, very complex. It's very complex, and I think I would encourage people to think well about this topic and to just do some general education, because an asylum seeker is not a refugee, is not someone here on parole, is not a green card. Like they are very complex, and I think talking about refugees publicly is different than talking about people seeking. They do require some nuance and difference. So anyway, I'll stop monologuing, but that would be something I'd add.
Michelle, as you mentioned, I mean, people aren't necessarily all that well informed about all these issues, and they're very complex, and it involves questions of immigration policy, it involves questions of social teachings of the church and faith groups. How challenging is this as a journalist to sort of present this picture to people, to your readers?
Yeah, it's so confusing, and complicated, and that's probably why I've stayed in our beat, just because it's so interesting and important. I think, as you said, about different things happening at the same time, I think that's true on a lot of levels. I think, again, in just interviewing anecdotally when you talk with people about, say, the Catholic Church and its teachings and this kind of very simplistic back and forth. Well, the church also teaches that nations have a right to guard their border. Nobody's saying that they don't. The Catholic teaching isn't saying that if they're talking about the Catholic Church's support for migrants. So I think as much as I would I think we have to think about like our education system and civic education and all this stuff that's going to take us decades to do, I think there's a reality that people get their information from quick bubbles, and so I think one of the things I'm interested in is the attack on institutions in recent decades, and the question about where people get their information and who they listen to and what resonates and why. How did faith groups become at odds with the federal government, or seeing the government as an opponent? I know that's very complicated, and there's many different faith groups with different, sort of how we got into this gut feeling. And I do think that the sort of the lack of compassion issue is really profound. that's something that permeates across our culture in general. It's not just this issue. But I don't know if those are such, sometimes I think of, when I try to think about how to cover as one religion reporter, so, okay, what's the most important thing? And you think about the churches on the ground and the conversations they're having. I was just explaining that yesterday I was on the phone with a Lutheran group in the Southwest who was having a Zoom call with a bunch of local churches because the Lutheran umbrella group had just canceled funding for a homeless program, basically, in the region because of the cutbacks and worrying about their budget and what's going to happen going forward. And, trying to see these churches figure out, can we keep it going on our own without Lutheran services, without the insurance of Lutheran services, et cetera? And their frustration and, the opposition to their programs in their communities. And I don't know, I guess I think we all blame each other. And I think being in an era where a lot of people point their fingers at the media, I try to be very, humble and not take it personally, that there's a lot of these things going on at the same time, but we really, all of us have to take responsibility. It's not really, and part of that is slowing down and saying, where do people, what information, about the border, what is it when things are out of control? Okay, what do you mean? Things, if I heard such and such on the media, well, who said that? What media can, trying to kind of each of us realize that we're in this knot together, this sort of dysfunctional knot together. Anyway, I don't know, that's me rambling about that.
How did you become a religion reporter, and why did you become a religion?
Well, everybody has their own religion story. I grew up in a Jewish home that was a lot of division around different issues that kind of drove my, why? What is this about? What piece is my identity? And then I wound up spending a year in college in Jerusalem, which was the first Gulf War. So that was very intense, and spending the whole year with a gas mask, purse, and just got me fascinated in religion and religious identity and that kind of thing. But back then, so this was in the 90s, that was kind of, and I really do think all these things are connected, which is we had kind of a dysfunctional relationship with religion then, which was a religion reporter was kind of just a very formal religion page, either total deference or totally mocking.
Right.
We didn't treat it like sports or economics or whatever, it was just different. So I thought, that's not a really good beat. I'm gonna kind of try to do something else for a while, but it was the only beat I ever wanted.
Really?
So when it opened, I was like, yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just add
Anybody can
a
jump in
little
at any
bit to,
point.
I think the larger context that was brought up, and I think the problems, the attack on refugees not coming to the U.S. and the organizations helping them we're talking about the larger context. And this is where we are is a making of ourselves, and I mean all of us, frankly, all of us. We all, and I'm going to start with simply who's cutting our lawns, undocumented people, 70% I understand of agricultural workers, undocumented people. The fact that we let large groups of people in on a temporary basis, hoping that a country of two parties will come together and find solutions. That's not working these days. So we've been doing this for years, and at our border, having people approach and allowing them into the country with asylum claims, which is what we should do, but then we take 5 to 10 years to adjudicate that claim.
That's the chaos.
This is what's wrong.
Right.
I mean, it's not the people coming to the border. It's not the faith-based groups that are helping people. They're doing the right thing. Our government and ourselves, I mean, I'm not going to say our government, we have mismanaged and taken advantage of people who were fleeing poverty or persecution, who want to take care of the kids. We have taken advantage of them now for decades. And we have to come to a conclusion of this. I mean, I think we need to figure out legal pathways for people. We can't deport people. We have to find, perhaps, some of the criminals, perhaps, that are doing bad things to our citizens. But we have to find lawful ways to have people come and join us, particularly those who are persecuted. But you have to adjudicate these cases, which refugees are already adjudicated, but you have to adjudicate everyone else in a responsible way.
Mark, one of the key questions here is what's the role of the government as opposed to faith groups? Franklin Graham was at this meeting at the State Department last week, and he represents not only the legacy of his father, but an organization called Samaritan's Purse, which apparently only receives 5% of its funding from the government. And he made the argument that faith groups should not be so dependent on the government for funding. What do you make of that argument?
Well, that's a complex question to answer. I'll move away from Franklin Graham briefly, and I'm recalling a quote from Jerry Falwell Jr. before his fall when he was still president of Liberty University, and he was explaining the Lutheran two kingdoms concept of the state dividing responsibilities in the world between the church and the government, and said the church's vocation, the state's vocation is simply to punish the wicked and to uphold public order. There's no room there for compassion or providing for the least of these. And that was a very superficial understanding of the two kingdoms concept. I think a more mainstream understanding of almost universal Christian political theology is that the state does have duties that include compassion and looking out for the vulnerable. And I think most Christian traditions would say that all nations should have a conscience collectively. All nations ultimately stand before the judgment of God and will be judged for the mercy and compassion they showed to those who were most in need of it. And so where does that lead in terms of the government supporting humanitarian agencies? It wasn't that long ago during the Bush administration when most evangelicals were celebrating the fact that the Bush administration was showcasing its partnership with Christians organizations and believing that they were more capable and more effective in delivering these goods than would government bureaucracies be. So we've sort of come full circle in saying that the government shouldn't help religious agencies or shouldn't even partner with them. So evangelicals who were the most supportive voting demographic for this administration have done a remarkable turnaround, and in some cases, I'm afraid it's undergirded by this perspective that sees compassion as almost a sign of weakness. And of course, traditional Christian teaching would say no, true strength exemplifies compassion.
So you mentioned traditional Christian teaching. I'm curious how any of you see sort of Scripture as a guide for how people of faith should think about these issues. You're the minister, Alan, here, so.
Yeah, well, on the ground, it starts, like I said before, it starts locally. It starts where you are and how you treat people, how you see people. There's no room whatsoever to see people in a derogatory way, to withhold compassion, ministry to people. The cup of cold water, feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, welcoming the stranger. Matthew 25, Jesus said, as you do it, at least these you do unto me. And so that is to be our personal ministry and perspective. If you go into the Old Testament passages that talk about Leviticus 19 and Exodus and other places that talk about the sojourner, it says there should be one law for the native born and the sojourner. It talks about treating them well. It says to not mistreat them, but inherent in those passages is this idea that when the sojourner comes to you, they submit to the laws of Israel. They integrate well. They participate in society. They're welcomed, and so you do have all three of those things at work, which is the command, structure of order, security, compassion, treating them well, and then also the what I call shared character and community, which is the integration. And so I think what's happened is that we've let different parts of those drop out in our theology, in our practice, in our ministry, as well as how we see this publicly. And so then people react to that, and that's what's happening. And when I mentioned conflating all of it together, if it was just refugee the way resettlement the way that we do it, I think everything would work really well. The problem is you have all these other things, people waiting 5 years, come apply for asylum, that then everybody conflates together, right? And then they get confused about, they hear refugee and they think, oh, that's the people coming to the border. Well, it's not. Those aren't refugees. But in people's minds, they confuse it all, and then they get, and they say, well, we should welcome people here. So there's definitely a theological impulse to welcome and minister. But then when it gets into all the other issues, people well, I don't know what to do with that. That's beyond my purview. And so then when people come offering solutions, we're going to solve it. We're going to bring back order that's appealing to people, in the immediate, until it becomes cruel. And when people see the cruelty, they begin to say, that doesn't fit with our national values. And I don't know where we are on that timeline as far as people reacting to that. It could be down the road, but that's kind of how I see the theological impulse working out. We do have to be careful sometimes where we try to say, hey, the Bible says this, and so we're going to apply it to the state. Well, it's not a one-to-one equation. You have the witness of the church, which, you were talking about the moral conscience, right? So the church should speak to the state and say, this is what's right, this is what's wrong, this is what we should be doing. The state still has to decide whether they take that counsel and how that works, so. It's witness, it's not control.
Yeah.
Well, do you think that's how aware do you think people are of these things? I mean, these things are very muddled together, right? Like
Yeah.
tribal identity and political tribe and theology and that kind of thing. So how do you? I mean, obviously you're responsible for your own church, but how do you see any path for the United States to kind of in a more, popular culture or accessible way kind of talk about what the right thing to do is?
Yeah, I think on the ground, people are very clear. I've traveled all over the Southeast. I work with churches everywhere. You do not see, I haven't seen people in Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, hating immigrants, turning against them. I don't see violence. I rarely hear anything derogatory. When anything is spoken, it's more about the big picture stuff, right? It's not the people that they know. And so I think people are clear on how we should treat people. That's what I've seen. Not everybody. There are people who are terrible. That exist everywhere, right? But I'm talking about overall. But then when it gets into how this relates in policy, there's a lot of confusion because there's so many factors. And it depends on what you've heard, what your experience has been, what you're being influenced by. And so we have to work through all that. That's hard to do. That's hard work. But that's where we are.
Well, but you also have like the organization that goes on that gives people a sense of what their priorities are supposed to be for any group, political group, religious group. But I mean, I think particularly more conservative Christians in particular, but they know that abortion is a major issue. But these other issues are kind of more like, well, and I know obviously Pope Francis and Cardinal McElroy, who just came to DC, have tried to kind of say the face of Jesus is in the migrant. I mean, this is a specifically, theological issue. But I don't know if organized religion has that sway anymore. Do you know what I mean? How do you think this is? I don't know. It's a very complicated society that's going in different directions at the same time.
Yeah, Mark.
Tom, there was the meeting at the State Department that you referenced a couple of weeks ago. There
Were
was
you
a
there?
very interesting quote there from a friend of mine who works there who said something along the lines in explaining or defending the government getting out of the humanitarian business. Won't it be great when people around the world will be giving credit to their creator rather than to our country? And that was a rather interesting theological insight. So I've been pondering what that means. First of all, I would hope you give credit to your creator, no matter what the delivery system is. But also, I would say, getting back to a strictly hard power perspective, I hope I think America needs a lot of people around the world who are giving credit to America, because we're going to need a lot of friends and a lot of allies in the years and decades to come. But also the almost unreality of that perspective, to think that churches and private philanthropies in the immediate future are going to be able to replace what the government is shutting down. If USAID was spending, was it $60 billion a year? Private philanthropy is not going to fill that immediately. That's going to take years to replace.
Right. And the impact of those cutbacks in the developing world has been just devastating in terms of poverty and food insecurity and so forth. So we're going to continue this conversation, but I don't know if any of you want to join it. You're welcome to join it. Lily was going to get a microphone here, and you can. I'm sure you have your own thoughts to contribute. We got such a great panel here. I want to take advantage of what we got. So, does anybody have any thoughts about what's going on here? David. Father Hollenbach here.
Hi, I'm David Hollenbach. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, good. One of the things that Alan was making the distinction between compassion and response to the need for order and so forth, and I think that's a very important distinction to make, because I think it operates in people's minds in very vivid ways, where they do have that compassion, but they also want order and they don't like chaos and so forth. But if we go back to biblical ideas, I mean, the exodus of the people of Israel from Egypt into the Promised Land was a political movement. It was the creation of a new people. And when Jesus says at the Last Judgment, what you did to the least of my brethren, including the migrant or the stranger in your midst, this is part of the judgment of the nations, which is clearly not just about individuals. And so, but we've gotten, unfortunately, a long distance in many Christian communities, and I don't know whether this is true. It's probably less true in Islam. I don't know where it stands in Judaism, probably less in Judaism than it is in Christianity, of the individualistic approach to what Christian faith means. And that's something that's very contrary to what Pope Francis is trying to advocate. For example, in his encyclical letter Fratelli Tutti, brothers and sisters all, and he wants to talk about, he's very explicit in talking about political love, taking compassion or love and saying it has a very important political dimension. So the order and the compassion have to go together from that point of view. But I think we've not done a very good job of communicating that to all the people in the Christian church in the United States. And somebody like, was it Jerry Falwell or Franklin Graham, you said, who was making that two kingdoms distinction in a way that said this, the state does all of this very rough and tumble stuff, and compassion is something else. That's wrong. That's a wrong but we haven't lived up to that, and finding ways to do it, it seems to me, is part of where we are as a country right now. Anyway, that's a thought. I mean, all I'm saying is that I think there are biblical bases for arguing that we should put these two things together rather than keeping them separate.
Right. I absolutely see order and compassion working together. And I believe, and please correct me, I mean, I'm at Georgetown, so you guys know more about Catholic teaching than I do, but in my reading of Catholic social teaching related to immigration, there is both the rights and the dignity of the migrant, as well as the perspective of the receiving community, like they're to be considered as well. And that's where I see that coming together, right? So you have to consider the people who are receiving and what is their state of mind, what are they able to do, and that's where I think some of this disequilibrium that we're in right now has come from people on the receiving end of things saying, wait a minute, Our community is changing faster than I'm ready for it to. I'm not prepared for this. How does all this work? And the questions, if we could see them as, hey, this is an opportunity to answer things and to bring order back in, then you could maybe have those work. I think they should work together. But maybe what the public is saying is that they don't feel like it is working together, so they're asking for it too. We're responding in the immediate political moment of the last 54 days, I think. If we can look at this on a 10, 15-year cycle of where we've been over the last 4 administrations, I think you'll start to see a little bit more clearly what people are really asking for. That's just an opinion.
Bill, do you want to add on Catholic social teaching?
Yeah.
Well, absolutely correct. I mean, the asylum seeker, the refugee who comes has both, also has responsibilities to integrate, to be part of the group, and as a Christian, we have responsibilities. So it is a give and take. But I want to take it a little bit out of perhaps the religious perspective, in that I think this issue, this problem, this huge problem we have before us is a little bit related to the common good, which we have a general definition of, where everyone shares, and this is also in most of our religious, everyone shares the goods of the earth. Well, our country is far from equal sharing or even close to the goods that we have us. And I think our people are being pitted against those who are perceived as taking from them something that they probably don't even already have because of the socioeconomic. So I just want to raise that there's a socioeconomic struggle here that I think is being played, and people are being pitted against each other over time. This has been going on for a while as the quote-unquote American dream becomes more elusive to all of us, and I mean almost all of us. So I think that is, this pitting against each other is also a cruelty that we need to be conscious of.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just wondering, and we can do this after, whatever, if Bill and Chelsea could talk about what you, to the degree you can, I mean, to what degree what kind of conversations do you think the White House would be having about what we're saying? Are these arguments and thoughts coming into their perspective, and where do you think it's going? Like sort of a little bit more on the inside.
I can give my thoughts, and then Bill, you can jump in. I think two things. I think resettlement will come back in some form. What that form is, I don't know. I do, from what we've heard, I think it will come back in some form. I'm hopeful that it will come back in some form. And I think that's why these types of conversations, both publicly and then behind closed doors, are so important, is because we're still in that 90-day review period. We're still in, I think we're still in a place where we can move and urge the administration. I mean, we all know Trump really does listen to the last person he talked to. And so we're trying to help have conversations with the administration, with influential lawmakers, to say, I think we're beginning to enter into what could be a paradigm shift in foreign assistance, in refugee resettlement, and instead of going to such an isolationist perspective, which, if I'm being candid, that's where I fear it could go, is helping to make the case and using the administration's own language of, I mean, I don't want waste, fraud, and abuse with my taxpayer dollar, right? None of us do. I want America to be safe and prosperous and strong. We want that. And so using their own language to say, we don't want these things either. We want America to be safe, strong, and prosperous. Here is how refugee resettlement and robust humanitarian life-saving assistance actually does accomplish both of those goals. So all that to say, we're having those conversations very actively, and I think that's why these conversations are hopefully helpful and help shape public narrative, but also shape shape how the White House is thinking and viewing these things.
Ma'am, you had a point you. Go ahead. Wait for the microphone.
Two things, and I'm Maureen Shea, and I go to an Episcopal church on Capitol Hill where we have dealt with both the buses coming in and sponsoring Afghans on SIVs. So I think one of the things, that the discussion of chaos is fascinating because we have had chaos because we do not have a decent immigration system. Good luck anyone trying to understand what happens now. And I think it is very hard. We get faced with, yes, the Afghan SIVs have been fully vetted, so they're okay, but we don't really want to be saying, be compassionate to them only and not to the struggling migrant who made it here. So in terms of language, I think we have to be very, very careful about that. And now the chaos that they've done means this administration, we have people, especially in the DMV area, but around the country, who are terrified about their futures, whether it's Medicaid or it's Social Security or their federal workers losing their jobs. So we're asking them to be compassionate and hoping they'll still support all these problems which are before us and need to be helped. And then you look at the people, the Haitians in Ohio, who were integrated, and look at what happened to them. So our need to be advocating for these people in all these ways, I think, is just really challenging right now for all of us. And one final small thing, when I was working on these issues years ago, and there was some polling done, and it found welcoming the stranger terrifies people. A stranger is someone you don't know anything about. Yeah. And that language, when you used it, if you're talking about, this is the person taking care of my grandmother in assisted living, paving my street, or helping me at the grocery store, it's a very different conversation.
A stranger in today's context means something very different than it means. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, you bring up a couple of good points. One, a lot of us, due to that, use the term welcoming the newcomer, and we got away from using the stranger for the same reason. But you also raised the second point. We're perhaps overly focused on the refugee. We're having this panel about the refugee. The agencies have been very careful in the advocacy groups over the years not to isolate this lawful refugee resettlement program against or pit it against the migrant or the asylum seeker. We've been very, very careful about that. And unfortunately, due to the stop work order and suspension, we're kind of forced in the fact that no one is getting their rightful service, most importantly, that we've contracted to do with them. So that's, secondly, I just want to say a little bit on the dialogue. We and a lot of sectors of society are dialoguing with the government through the courts. Mm-hmm. Right. We're talking to the government through the courts. Mm-hmm. We are, in this particular case, but in others, getting from the government now what their policies are. And they're being forced to rethink what they're doing. In the case of resettlement, they have said, we're going to continue. And they've actually taken some steps to continue. They didn't terminate all the contracts overseas. They've stated they're going to continue the program. We're pretty sure they're not going to continue it with some of us who they perceive as being adversaries, which we're not. The Catholic Church in this country and the government have never been, adversaries in different times at different places, but overall, buy into the whole, America, as a place where we live and practice our faith. So unfortunately, we're dialoguing in the courts. We'll see, if that dialogue can be actually personalized with some, a meeting like was held with some, and we can start to talk people to people, if you will. But the dialogue is happening in the courts.
Now, apart from refugee resettlement, we are looking at a pretty definitive cutback in USAID funding, which is going to have dramatic impacts quite apart from refugee resettlement.
But isn't some of, so bear with my ignorance on this, but isn't some of the foreign aid, USAID and other agencies, affects refugees because it's they're helping the refugees on the other end, or helping, not people necessarily who are going to be resettled in the United States, but
A lot of the foreign aid, and I've worked in these contexts, the Balkan Wars, for example, the foreign aid that the organization I worked for was to help those refugees who have left their country go back and resettle settle back into their own countries. Employment programs, small business development, this is what USAID does. Helping people get back with the United Nations and others, stabilizing in countries where they are. I mean, Lebanon has more refugees in their country than they do people, I believe. So stabilizing those populations, again, with the larger humanitarian community, which we've pulled back from because of this. A great the work of USAID and why the power is so soft is that it's providing support for local governments and national governments to help their people be safe, secure, and live a decent life. That's the majority of the work.
It's to address the push factors that cause people to migrate in the first place.
Yep.
We have time for at least one more question. Yes, ma'am.
I'd just like to sort of echo the earlier point about the concern and sort of see how you both speak to keeping these groups from becoming two separate entities. I think we have, as Chelsea mentioned, completely eliminated legal pathways to pursue asylum on the southern border. And some of this is also because this disorder has been deliberately created since policies that came about in the 1990s, right? So I worry that we create refugees that are good and this 1% that gets resettled versus all of the rest. And all of these are still from this very narrow view, these 5 criterion that are laid out in the 1951 convention that don't accommodate for people fleeing for reasons of environmental or other Newark challenges, right? So when we're talking to people who might be able to influence the current administration, what are the pathways that you're seeing? And on the notion of the responsibility of fitting in, is the sort of overwhelming economic evidence of how much migrants, undocumented people do contribute to our economy, is that a pushing point that you're seeing any traction with at the administration's level? So, I mean, I'm thinking it's like $300 billion is my understanding, right, of how much people contribute to our economy. I would have thought that this would be a powerful point to say, we need to figure out better legal pathways, but we can't afford not to have migrants and people who are doing this work.
Have you looked at that, Michelle?
Not so much. I think probably other people might be better at speaking about that. It did make me, what you said did make me wonder if, I don't want to take the time on one of these guys who probably know better than I do about that. What are the sort of the arguments
So
that could be
the
made?
Health and Human Services came out with a study actually instigated by the Trump administration on contributions, and it's available. They only published it they took their time this is refugees alone, of the billions of dollars of contributions that they make over time to our economy. But those arguments don't hold with a lot of people. What will perhaps get to the administration as they stop this program, but also perhaps start dealing with kicking the undocumented out of our country, if you will be the prices of food goes up because we don't have the agricultural workers. The businesses in agriculture will and are pushing back. You've already talked to other industries, restaurant owners, other industries saying, look, we need workers. We know this. We know this. So I think that's where you'll start to perhaps see, along with, if it gets too cruel, the common person pushing back. But the businesses are already starting to push back as they have workers in hiding now. People are hiding in fear. They're not going to work. So I think that if there's not a change in the trajectory of the administration, that will also accelerate.
Final thought, Alan?
If I could just add, I mean, just the concept of trust back into the equation. I mean, the things you mentioned, you know, the 5 criteria for asylum, but then when you have people coming that don't meet that criteria, but they pass a credible fear test and they're thrown into the system. So I think that people who are citizens here, they look at that and they say, well, then I can't trust the laws that have been passed or the systems to adjudicate this well. So what do? We need to pull back. And so when the trust level goes down that the system is working correctly, then fear rises, then people are a lot more apt to say, let's stop it, or, you know, let's react against it until we can get this under control. That's apart from all the political rhetoric and everything. I'm just talking about people, you know, who are just trying to figure this out, right? And so often there's the thing, well, they're contributing and they're doing this work that we need. Yeah, but the law is this, and yes, we're benefiting from that, but that's where the disconnect comes in, and then trust continues to decline. So we've kind of withdrawn from the bank account of trust as much as we can on this, it seems like, and then people are now asking for a correction. And you know, that's just a perspective to reintroduce. How do we rebuild trust in the system so that we can solve some of these things? That's a big question. I don't have an answer for it, but maybe we can consider that in the future. So.
I'm afraid we're out of time. Some of us at least will mill around here for a little bit if you have more questions. Actually, this has been such an important discussion, and it needs to be shared with more than just those of us who are in this room, and it will be shared because the whole discussion has been recorded and will be available on the web page where you originally saw it. I don't know how long it takes, Louis, but you know, pretty quickly, right? Yeah, with captions. So do whatever you can to sort of make sure that these insights do get shared. I'd like to thank you for coming. A special thank you to these really 5 distinguished panelists, all of whom have many demands on their time and took time out of their schedule to come today. We also remind you there is boxed lunches for anyone that it is lunchtime. So here's your chance. All right, so thank you very much. Thank you to the panelists.